to make a host.
Aha, here I am. Thank you. Thank you and welcome everyone to the first or the inaugural of these Monday Design Forums. Unfortunately, I can't be there in Hobart today. I'm based in Launceston. But first of all, before I start, I just would like to do an acknowledgement of country. So I acknowledge that we're meeting and working on Aboriginal land, and I pay my respects to the Palawa people, the traditional owners of this land, its skies and waterways. I pay honour to elders past, present and emerging. So thank you, and thank you all for being here. I'm not sure how many people are physically there in Hobart, but I can see quite a few names here on the Zoom, which is wonderful. Just to introduce myself for those of you who don't know me, my name is Kirsty Marte. I am the course coordinator for the associate degree in applied design, as well as the undergraduate certificate in applied design at University College. And those courses are integral to what we term here the design nest. So that incorporates the Bachelor of Design, which Associate Professor Cribwin Owen is the course coordinator for in Architecture and Design. And also within the College of Fine Arts, where those of you who are physically in Hobart today will be seated at Hunter Street. And Dr. Nick Rubenus heads up the course there in CAM, in Creative Arts and Media. So these forums that we're putting on, these Monday Design Forums, are a collaboration between all of those three aspects of the design nest. So all of the staff have put in suggestions for different speakers for the entire semester and eventually the year that support the teaching and learning that they are doing in their courses for the students. So this is predominantly for students, but it's also for anyone who's interested in design. So we hope that more people will join us as these different courses, as the Monday Design Forum progresses. So we have a really exciting program of weekly speakers on these different aspects. They will be hosted in Hobart and in Launceston and obviously on Zoom. And so that our students who are also participating in the different courses in the online space can also participate. And obviously for those who can't make it physically to either Launceston or Hobart, then you can also view these online. So occasionally they'll be hosted in Hobart, as today, and then at other times they'll be hosted in Launceston, and we'll let you know when that happens. So I'm going to pass over to the wonderful, now Jose, I'm going to pronounce your name incorrectly, so just please forgive me, but Jose Garcia Cesar, he has been instrumental in getting these organised, and also I just want to thank University College for actually funding these forums for us. So I'm going to hand over to Jose now to introduce Demelza Rafferty, our inaugural speaker. Thank you.
Thank you, Kirsty. So yes, as Kirsty said, this forum is going to be hosted every Monday, but obviously next Monday is public holiday in Tasmania for those who are interested. So next Monday we will not have design forum, but it will happen every Monday. So we are going to do a 40 minutes presentation. We will have today the amazing Demelza Rafferty. She's a designer, art director, creative director, and a fantastic human being. She's Tasmanian, and she has been traveling around the world, and it's going to be fantastic to see her journey. So she will do a 40 minutes presentation, and in the last 10 minutes, we will have the opportunity to ask some questions. For those who are online, feel free to write any questions in the chat, and we will take care of them at the end of the session. And also feel free to open your mics please be respectful and just ask for permission in order to talk, and we will open the mic and just you can directly ask to Demelza. So I don't want to take more time, so please welcome Demelza, and I'm going to share the screen for her and stop this thing, and yeah, here's Demelza. Thank you. So here it is. Can you see the slides? Yes, fantastic.
Yeah. Hi, well, thank you for that introduction, Jose. Thank you very much for having me. It's very surreal to be back at the university I graduated from, voluntarily talking about myself, because I'm quite a shy person generally, so bear with me, this is my first presentation. So, yeah, my name's Demelza Rafferty.
My fault. Completely my fault. Yeah, no, she won't.
So as Jose said, I'm a graphic designer, art director, creative director. Sometimes I illustrate, and I'm always crafting at home. And I work in purist design, advertising, branding, communication, and brand strategy. I've sort of straddled advertising design most of my career. I've had a really incredible journey so far. I worked locally in Hobart, and then I've gone to the States, I went to Europe, I've done little stints across the way, back to the States, and then back to Hobart. So I'm going to just give you a journey of my career and share how that sort of played out, which is not how I anticipated it. So a career is a really interesting thing when people ask you about your career. Things to know about your career: you are in charge of your career, and you leave university and you have your degree and you can go forth in the world, but you're also not always in charge of your career. And the defining moments in my career aren't necessarily work related, or different events have shaped the way that my courses run. So I wanted to share all the personal as well as the work influences, just so you see what kind of journey you can end up. So there aren't always things that you can control. There are influences outside of your control. And the one thing that I sort of found as I did this exercise of looking back over my career, what is consistent? Well, change is consistent, and things are constantly changing from job to job and country to country. And yeah, so I graduated here, and I sort of wanted to take stock and decide for myself, what did I need after graduating? I was offered honours, I turned that down, I needed to work. I also needed change. This was 20 odd years ago. I hadn't travelled extensively to the mainland. It was not something people did that much. It was expensive. I hadn't been overseas, and I was really keen to do that typical Australian thing where you go overseas for a couple of years. So for that, I needed two things. I needed an escape plan and money, because it's expensive. So I worked locally for 2 years and saved every penny and hatched a plan with a couple of friends of mine. And this is the first instance where things changed course before I'd even left the country. So I wanted to go straight to London, like most Australians. The two other girls that I was travelling with wanted to go to the US, and 2 against 1, we ended up going to the US. One dropped out, so it was just down to the 2 of us. So how I did that 20 odd years ago, I had an interactive PDF. I got a phone book out of the library for Boston. That was the place to go. And I had dial-up internet, which is 7th level of hell for anyone who had to live through that, and a spreadsheet. And I'm quite a methodical person, and basically just the phone book, because it wasn't always obvious to find people or easy to find people online. The internet was still in its infancy. Not everyone had an online presence. So I basically sent out 400 odd emails to everyone I could in Boston who I thought was interesting. Again, you can't always tell these kind of companies online at that point. And from that, I got 3 job offers. and I sort of evaluated that, and our plan was to go for 3 months. So it wasn't a big commitment, but still I'm like, well, I want to make use of the time. I don't want to go somewhere crappy. I want to go somewhere that I respect. So the place I ended up going was Northampton, Massachusetts, which is not Boston. It is 2 hours out of Boston. And when I first sort of thought, oh, it's going to be, you know, in a big city, and 2 hours in a big city, it's, you know, it's not that far from it. But the US have a really efficient highway system that spits you straight out and straight far. So Northampton is a town of like 35,000 people at the time. So quite small. It's a university town though, so it had a really good energy, and there are 3 universities within close proximity. So it had a really good young vibe. So it was a great place to go. And the place I went to was Titanium. My office is like way off to the left of this photo. And they were a design and advertising agency. They were really small. They focused on .com companies. It was a 15-person studio, and I was there for about 2 years. And they were my family. They were instant family. My bosses Holly was like a long-lost big sister, very caring, nurturing environment. It was a great first step in the States. And yeah, that 3-month period became 2 months. So that was the first sort of initial shift. Wasn't intending to stay in the States for that long. And then the .com crash happened and I lost my job, which when your job is linked to a visa is a problem. So then I was sort of with another young designer. We both lost our jobs. This was on a Thursday, so we started scrounging, went to bookshops to get communication arts, to look up all the good graphic design companies in Boston and New York at the time, and we were going to make a hit list and, you know, just continue on. And we thought that'll be fine. They're big places. We can get a job in New York easily. So that was sort of our goal. And then there was more change that was quite unexpected. So we lost our job on the Thursday. The following Tuesday was September 11, which was quite shocking. And we were in the office because we were allowed to go back to the office and use the computers because no one had a home computer or a laptop to look for work. And so we sat there watching the second plane crash into the tower, which, as you can imagine, was quite terrifying. Needless to say, the world changed at that point, not just our own situation. And I had to recalibrate everything. So I was still sort of, you know, we were there for a few months. I had a few months leeway. I was still trying to find work in New York. There wasn't any. It was a terrible moment. And during that course of interviewing, I interviewed at Pentagram with, if anyone knows Pentagram, it's a pretty big design firm, mostly London and New York. And I interviewed with an Australian designer, and that was really nice. And she was really lovely and really courteous and took the time to look at my folio, which you can imagine was not amazing at that point, young age, and probably not anywhere close to Pentagram worthy, but she was lovely and she took the time. And we were talking about the state of the States and knowing that we would probably have to look further afield, or I would have to look further afield for work. And I sort of said, oh, well, I'll probably go to London because where else do I go? And she suggested that I went to Amsterdam. And I was like, okay, Amsterdam seemed very random. And she's like, no, the Netherlands is great. It's got an amazing design sort of DNA built into it. They really respect design. Australians can get a reciprocal arrangement working visa there, so it's easy to go. You know, it's a great place to go. So I sort of walked away from that, thanked her for her time, thought she was quite mad, and came back home because my visa was linked to the job, so I had to leave the country. So I came home for 3 months and then sort of mulled on that idea of the Netherlands versus London. And I went to the library again and got a VHS video out on Holland to see what it looked like. And it looked quite nice. And I was like, okay, well, yeah, this actually looks like a nice place. And when you're young and you're not so committal, and I'm like, yeah, I could go there for 2 years, that'll be fine. So I got a visa for Holland, and I went to Amsterdam, where it's never sunny and rains a lot. But it's like a big village. It's quite a nice kind of cozy place to live. And same thing, starting up there, I didn't actually have a job to go to. I'd reached out, I'd started my spreadsheet and sort of reached out and tried to contact everyone I could come across. This was still the era of internet cafes. And so I had to go to an internet cafe. I didn't have a laptop. I couldn't afford a computer. So we would go to internet cafes, or I would go and research and try and get a job. And I did eventually get work, and that led to other work. And I worked at many places. I spent 13 years there. So the highlight reel of all that work would be, yes, I worked at a bunch of places, would be Nike as one of them. So this was a really interesting experience because it was client side. So that was quite different from what I'd done before. It was quite focused on retail, and quite interesting to see how the graphics played out in a retail environment, and how a print ad translates to on-store graphics and different sort of three-dimensional products like that. So that was a really interesting place to work. At the same time, I started freelancing at Wieden+Kennedy. If anyone knows Wyden, they are the biggest independent advertising agency in the world. They started in Portland with Nike. So basically that advertising agency was made to service the very beginning of Nike, and they've had a lifelong partnership between the two companies. So Nike moved to Hilversum in the Netherlands, and Wyden followed them and helped them to do their European work. So when we're in Europe, we're working with EMEA, which is Europe, Middle East and Asia. So that was our region. And Wyden was a really amazing place to work. 150 people, give or take, 27 nationalities. And the people you see, or the images you see in the background, are all portraits of the people who work there. And they would change, you'd get your photo taken when you walk in there. And they would say, you know, when you come into our offices, you don't see our trophies and awards, you see the people, because these are the people behind the work. So they really hero the people. And this is me on the cover of one of the books they produce. So they do a lot of internal things because they're so big. So they produce fun books. We have founders days where there's crazy parties, and yeah, it's pretty intense, but a lot of fun. So they are the pinnacle of great advertising. They really stand for the work and the work coming first. So things like they will fire a bad client. You know, if they're not interested in doing good, challenging work, then they will respectfully let them go elsewhere. So that was really interesting to work with people who really fought for good work. So some of the clients I worked for there, it's a very long list, but predominantly Nike, Coca-Cola, we won that pitch and did that work. Vodafone, Carlsberg Beer, Nokia, BASF, Heineken, Tanqueray Gin, Vodka Viborova, and a lot more. And I sort of ended up in this space, which has followed me my whole career, of basically booze, shoes, and telecommunications. It seems to be my MO a lot of the time. I got to go to Shanghai for a few months, which was great. So there was a pitch going on at the beginning of that office, and they needed some volunteers from the other offices. So that was an interesting experience where a group of people from Portland office came over. I was sent over from Amsterdam. There was someone else from the London office, and we were all sent over there to win this initial business. And now the Shanghai office is a thriving office in Shanghai. Also got a stint in London, which was great. This is the Wyden London there. They actually own a building on the opposite side of the street as well. It's quite big. But that was a wonderful experience as well. We had a shared account between Sam office and the London office, so we worked jointly with them. The Wyden and advertising is very much a work hard, play hard environment. You work frequently late nights. 24-hour work days is not uncommon, especially if you've got a pitch. And, you know, after you work 24 hours, you don't have the rest of the day off. You go home and sleep for a few hours and then you come back in. And working all weekends is normal. And it is kind of fine in a way because you're young and, you know, not having family there, it's not like you had anywhere else that you needed to be. And your colleagues were your family and you hang out anyway. You know, there's always a bar in the office as well. So it's not as dismal as it may come across. But it's pretty intense, and it's sort of overloading of everything, you know, that work hard, play hard mentality. These are a few images I found of studio spaces. So it's a very organic space, and illustrators come in and they do a mural on the wall, and it's sort of got this nice mark of people have been through the Wyden doors. My takeaways from working at Wyden would definitely be to excel at your craft. So it was an amazing sort of training ground, I guess. It was sort of where I really grew up and really learned what good advertising should be and how to do that. And that also meant stay in your lane. So there's quite a strong hierarchy in that kind of agency, an agency of that size. It's part of a global network. There's a design studio. You work with a copywriter and art director team. Sometimes I sort of would step in and do dual roles and art direct and design. Sometimes you might have an art director who's great conceptually, but not great in design. And so Wyden always wants to ensure that the design arm is always present. And then you have your CDs who overview that, and then your ECD. So there's sort of a structure that goes through it. So you're a cog in a big machine, and it runs very smoothly. You learn to talk to global audiences. So it's very tricky when you look at doing advertising, when you have to do something that works for everyone. It is quite limiting and quite different from if you're working with a local Australian market. So if you imagine, you can't use any slang, you can't reference anything that might be an in-joke that only works in Australia. You have to do something that appeals to everyone of every age, of every, you know, denomination. So you've got to think quite broadly and quite cleverly. This was sort of evident in work we did for Coke. So this was the work that came out of the pitch that we won for Coca-Cola. So as you can see, it's quite a design-heavy execution. Our ECD at the time was a very purist designer, John Norman, and this work fell out of it. So we wanted a very simplistic execution. So you have to imagine that we set up the initial look and feel of the advertising, the concept of it, but then we give it to 60 other countries, and they have to be able to replicate it and adapt it to their market and give it meaning to their market. And so this construct worked really well. It heroes the bottle, which Coke is famous for. It's so unique, it's so recognisable, and obviously their logo, which we cut in half, which was a massive issue. If you tell a client you're going to cut their logo in half, they're not happy. But they ran with it and they trusted us, and this was hugely successful and ran globally for many years. At the same time as doing big client work, we also did smaller work. So this is for Nike, which, yes, is a big company, but the initial ask for this work was to design a PDF. We just need a PDF. We've just signed up a bunch of young female athletes, and we want to just share this with our network so they know that these are sort of the up-and-coming people to look for. So Wyden sort of took that on and thought, well, actually, it could be a PDF, yes, or we could actually really hero these women and make a beautiful book, and we can send that around, and that's going to be so much more impactful and so much more beautiful. So we have on the front cover sort of a take on a 50s pin-up girl, but she's all decked out in her Nike gear. And I got 3 athletes to work with, and one was a Spanish goalie, hockey goalie, and we made these, or I made this scrapbook that we photographed. It was very, very low budget, and photographed that, and we told her story after interviewing all of these athletes. Another one, we did get to use an illustrator here. This was for a Belgium sprinter. And this was my favorite. This was for an Italian mountain biker. So again, we had very little money to spend on this. This is sort of, you know, if you're a designer and you wanted to have fun and play, you put your hand up to sort of work on this on the side and, you know, sort of out of hours kind of deal. So this was for a mountain biker. And in the conversation that we had with her, yes, she's very skilled at what she does, but she said the big thing for her mountain biking is that there's always an external element that is just unpredictable. So you can trip over a root in the ground, or an animal can cut your path. And there's all these things that make it a bit of a roll of the dice. So that was really interesting. And from that, I sort of designed this board game, which sort of has this sort of idea of one step forward, two step backs at different points of it. And the structure that you see is a paper craft. It's a real structure. It's not CGI or anything like that. So I made all these hundreds of paper cones at home, and then we carted it off to a studio to photograph it. But if you wanted to do the job, that was the kind of work you had to put in for it. So Wieden+Kennedy is also called Wedding+Kennedy for really, really good reason. Like, you're in an incubator, you don't see anyone else because you're working all the time. And I fell mercy to that as well. And I met my husband, Edu, and we got married. So why that's relevant is because now there's two careers at play. So it's not just me anymore and me choosing for myself. You now have to factor in another person and their career. And they don't always align, and there's give and take involved. So that was a big shift in your own perspective. At that time, or not long after we got together, I'd been at Wyden 7 years. I was sort of getting a bit frustrated, like, you know, ready for something different, a different challenge. And we were coming home from work and just continuing to talk about work, which is not healthy. So something, you know, we thought for a relationship and sanity, it was good to not be working together anymore. So big change. I went to a company called Sid Lee. So they are from Montreal originally, and they are actually a graphic design and architecture company predominantly, and then they sort of came into advertising. So they have a Paris office and had an Amsterdam office. They now have offices everywhere, and they're growing really fast. And they were really interesting to work with. They were the polar opposite of Wyden. So I sort of moved agency thinking, well, I know how this works. I've done it all before, but no, this was a very young agency, very nimble. Average age was 25 years old. I was about 35 at the time. So it was very weird from going to being sort of in the middle of it to senior, very senior. And they were digital native millennials, and they were industry rebels. So they had that reputation of not doing the normal thing. And if you want something heavily interactive and digital, you go to a shop like Sid Lee. I got to go to Montreal for sort of a heavy induction for Adidas, which was the client that they had won, and that would sort of instigated this big hiring that they had in Amsterdam. So that was really interesting and great, always great to go to the mothership and learn from the founders and learn sort of about their culture and how they think, because Québécois are a little bit different. They're a little bit out there, quirky lot. And it was really baptism by fire, sort of dropped in the deep end and figure out a lot of just flat hierarchy and different rules. And they were very unstable. So this was the main thing about, you know, being young and nimble and doing everything on the fly. It was a little bit unbalanced. So we had 4 ECDs in 4 years. So the ECD is the Executive Creative Director. They are the creative head of a company. And they can, or they usually have a strong personality. And that usually dictates type of work you might go for, or the type of work that you produce. So every time we had a new ECD come in, we'd say, or they would say, okay, we're not going to do digital anymore. We're going to do, or focus on that. We're going to be 360, which means everything, print, digital, and everything in between. And then a new ECD would come in and say, no, we don't want to do digital anymore. We're just going to focus on traditional advertising. And that kept going back and forth constantly. So that was quite a lot of adjustment and constant readjustment to the whim of the ECD. So I had to rewire my thinking quite a lot, and I had to learn to cross the lanes, which didn't sort of come naturally to me after being sort of quite pigeonholed and knowing what the parameters of my work was, to all of a sudden be doing a lot of different things and to learn to just take a stab at things and, you know, write some copy, you know, start creative directing, run the presentation, things that I, you know, would never have done in Wyden before. It was now sort of a free-for-all. So that was a sort of a really good growth period. So then we were working with Adidas Women. And again, I thought, well, I've done a lot with Nike Women, so I know how women in sport, how that operates. But no, Adidas is a completely different company that has a completely different take and direction when it comes to women in sport. So they're much more fashion driven than performance like Nike was. And the fashion side came out a lot. We did a digital lookbook, and this was sort of like a battle where you could vote on different stylists of which look you like best. And the point of this was to show a lot of different combinations of the product on real people, but also to move away for the first time of showing a head-to-toe Adidas outfit, which is not how everyone dresses, but how one piece might be incorporated in a normal wardrobe. So that was really good and ran really well for them, and they did it for a subsequent year after this. Also did a WebGL experience for the F50 boot. So I've done a lot of football work before. So this is a sort of interactive website where the boot sort of expands and you can see different layering and all the wonderful things you want to know about a football boot if you're in the market for one. And then there was change. This one was self-inflicted, parenthood. So it's this is Oscar, my firstborn, and parenthood shifts things and it changes your perspective. And, you know, it is a different time after you have kids. So one thing that's a little controversial to say is that advertising doesn't like mothers. And what I mean by that is that the hours that are required to do well in advertising and all-night pitch work and, you know, and traveling for shoots and going for client meetings in whichever country, that doesn't really gel well when your husband's also doing that. And it's like no one left home looking after the baby. So it's a little bit tricky. But I was determined to keep my career going strong. And I had a new ECD at Sid Lee, who was to paint the picture, nearly 7 foot, red-headed Scotsman, quite intimidating. And he sort of phoned me up and said, well, you're due back in a month from maternity leave. Let's have an off-site chat. And I was like, okay, here we go. So I was preparing to be fired at a swanky restaurant off-site, so I didn't make a scene in front of everybody else. That was sort of my take on it. So I sort of went to this lunch, dressed to the nines, because I'd been at home with a baby in sweats for 8 months, so I was quite happy to be in heels and go off. And I was all ready to sort of plead my case and sort of say why I was still had some worth. And before I could really get into that, he offered me a promotion, which sort of really shocked me at the time. And I was like, what? I was all ready to, hang on, you know, fight for my job, and here you're promoting me. And what I didn't know that well about him is he's a father of 4 kids. And his theory was, or view was, that I've seen how my wife operates and how she runs everything. And I've seen how women run everything. He was a little bit older. And he's like, they're amazing. They come in, they do their job, and they're done by 5 because they have somewhere better to be after 5 o'clock. And it's much more effective, and they're not just shooting the breeze by the water cooler for 45 minutes. So he's like, no, I love mothers in advertising. So I feel very fortunate that I had someone like that who recognised that. So that was a big change for me. And it was great to have experience acknowledged. And I had newfound confidence because of that, but also because I made a human being, which is you know, quite a shocking thing to do as well on the side. So I went back and I led the design for Absolut. So this is for product. So this was part of a series of photography work, and each of these images is actually at least 30 images. So it's probably hard to see on screen and on Zoom, but the pear one, for example, has this really surreal kind of hyper-realistic quality to it. It's almost painterly. So we work with a really amazing glass and liquid photographer in Amsterdam, Marcel Christ, because they have such specialists there. And yeah, he was amazing and did this work for us. And then we did another campaign. This was for North and South America, which is a lot of colour. Normally not be quite so colourful, but that's what the brief was. And Absolut have a sort of rule about being really honest and open about their products, and they use real ingredients and all of this. So this is real fruit frozen in real blocks of ice that we then stacked and photographed. And something to know is, like, when you put two ice blocks together, they lock and you can't move them. So we had to have all these structures pre-arranged, pre-approved. We also did one photograph, and that cut down into several different executions. So that was a very sort of challenging thing to get sort of one that worked for out of home, and the States have a really crazy out of home proportion, and for the usual aspects. So then there was more change. And this time it's because my husband got offered a job in New York. So that was a big move. We had a family. I was loving my job. You know, everything was sort of, there was no reason to leave Amsterdam. Everything was kind of good. But we decided it was too good an opportunity to not take up. But I knew if I was moving over there with a young baby, Oscar was going to be 11 months, that I probably wouldn't be working. So we made a deal between us, and we had a shot for the second pregnancy. So I moved over 3 months pregnant, and I wasn't allowed to work, which is a really hard pill to swallow when you spent most of your life, you know, having left home for your career to sort of go to a place where you're not allowed to work. It's difficult. So I had to park my career and settle the family into Brooklyn life and raise my boys for the year, with, I should caveat, with massive help from my parents, who I think are watching. So thank you. And it was complete mayhem. You know, anyone who's been around young kids, they're just bonkers. So we got used to life in New York. There's a view from our balcony. So extreme weather, crazy hot summer where I don't fare very well. I'm a true Tasmanian. I wilt over 25 degrees. So I had a sanity passion project on the side, which, if you're ever in a position where you're not being fulfilled at work or at a point in time, I highly recommend it. So I had started a book about the canals in Amsterdam and all the different boats there, and I finished it when I was in New York and published it, self-published it in Amsterdam. In the meantime, I got a green card, which changed everything again, which let me freelance. And it was quite intimidating in New York to sort of figure out how to get work. So I reached out to my network, and I realised I actually did have a pretty good network in New York, because it's a small industry and people move a lot. So I started working at Mother, which is another independent design-led advertising agency. They actually have a separate design department. And I worked on T-Mobile, which was quite fun, a lot of interactive. We got our work in Times Square. I went to Seattle a lot, and also worked at RGA. So RGA, I did a lot of Nike and also Samsung. So the work here is a digital campaign we did for Samsung. The thing I want to point out about this, because it just looks like photography, which obviously it is, but we had to use the Samsung phone to shoot this, because they were all, the campaign was to show the different aspects and techniques you could do on the phone. So we were only allowed to use the Samsung phone, which we were only allowed to have when we were on set in LA and only for limited periods. And we weren't allowed to retouch a single image. So if we're all quite reliant on being able to Photoshop stuff and tweak stuff, we weren't allowed to tweak anything, not a thing, because people download the metadata and, you know, trawl through and see you cheated. So that doesn't work when you're trying to show off the features of the phone. So that was an interesting project. Back home, things were quite messy. And that led to my first private client, Amalga Distillery, which was a cabin on the woods where they were learning how to distill gin and vodka. And I started a paper craft look for them so I could sort of have a design that looked like it was crafted alongside them. I'm speeding up now because I know I'm running out of time. So this was the brand identity for them, which became packaging. And I realized I didn't need a huge agency to make work, which was kind of a shocking thing. And I realized that I am an agency and I can produce everything or find the people that I might need for a specific task. And I've included this image, which is a really shitty image of my studio at the time, which was a tiny room in the house in New York with no heating or no air conditioning. But just to show you that you don't need anything fancy to make work. This is it. It's very unglamorous and very small. So I realized I was an agency by doing, watching, moving to different places, asking questions, and osmosis, just being around it. But I realized with that private job that I liked autonomy and dictating my own pace. And I really liked helping small businesses to set up and set them on the path of success through design branding. And then there was more change. This idiot came onto the field and kind of ruined everything. And there was a palpable change of mood in New York, and we started to really reevaluate things. And we sort of looked around us and what was important, and it was these monkeys. And we wanted to give them the best childhood you can. And the school option was a concrete jungle, basically, just a really tiny concrete playground. And we thought, no, we know somewhere better. So we said goodbye to New York and we moved to Hobart to give these boys like the gift of a Tasmanian childhood, which I'm sure you can all relate to, is pretty spectacular. So we decided to park our careers again. And I started working for myself, and I actually got a lot of nice work. So working for Mona, this was a product from Mona Foma. Blunston, so booze and shoes, again, coming into play. Exhibition design for Blunston, which was really fun. More alcohol branding for Joseph Cromie, Rosalind, Campagnac, which is owned by Mona. It's a Mona job. And this was from the garage studio. So again, not a glamorous place. It was literally half a garage that again was freezing in winter and boiling in summer. And then more change, COVID. So we all know the COVID story. But what was interesting for me is my client from Alaska actually had an opportunity to close their cellar doors and keep making work, which they did. So that was a nice upshoot. And so what's really important is your old networks and relationships matter. And so I'm now still working for New York a lot. So my advertising agencies reach out and we do work, and sometimes they reach out and I'm like, oh, do you realize I'm in Tasmania? They're like, oh, we totally don't care anymore where anyone is. We just want to cherry pick who we want to work with and do good work. So the last change was the move to an actual office space, where I still have a desk, but it's in a nice space with a meeting room, which is handy. And I share an office space with another designer and some architects, which is great. And I get to make work I really like with people I like, and more Mona craziness. So your career is the sum of many, many parts. It's the work, but it's also the company, world events, politics, an individual, random encounter, marriage, family, technology. And I just kind of learned to trust in my journey and go with the flow and trust that the world gave me what I needed at the time. So leaving the States, I thought, was the worst thing that could possibly happen to me when I lost my job, but Amsterdam was the best thing that could have ever happened to me. So silver linings and just trust in the journey. So take charge of your career, but embrace the changes, because COVID probably feels like a really big thing, but I think just wanted to illustrate that there's going to be continuous changes and there'll be something after COVID, and just go with it. So learn your craft, find your passion, deliver good work, pay attention to everyone around you, document your work, document your working life, not just on LinkedIn. Develop your network, and really develop your network and nurture it. And be nice. Another reason I'm getting work from New York is not because I'm an asshole to work for. Support each other, because that can go a long way too. And lastly, I just have a couple of resources for you guys, which Jose can share. And that's it. Thank you.
You. Wow, fantastic.
Thanks.
What a journey, Lel. So now is the time for anyone that is here present or online to make some questions to Lel. So I will stop. Well, I will do this.
Yeah.
And I'm going to turn on the light, because you were like dark muffled mood
really?
with the webcam, so
Okay.
they can see your light on. That it was cool. A little bit of time.
Okay.
Okay. So please, anyone, you have a question?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Which one? This one?
Yeah.
Yeah, sure.
Can send it through. So it's just some practical advice on Instagram, podcasts, which I like, and some book lists. My good book list.
Yes, for everyone to know, I'm gonna everything is recorded, and we are gonna set up a website as well as a YouTube channel where everyone can see the present and future events and past events. Obviously, no future. This is going to be a challenge, so it's not future, but it will be past events. So just in case you cannot make it, you know that you will have the opportunity to watch it afterwards. So all this information, even if there are some other slides that you're more interested, you will see it in the video as well. Okay. So, any questions?
What is the font of the card that you use in your presentation?
Pardon?
Did you create the font of the card?
No. The font is Keiko, I believe. Yeah. Yeah. C-A-K-O, I think. Keiko, I think. Good question.
Yes. I give them like one maybe, but I love the story of the boss promoting you.
Yeah.
It's amazing. But anyways, I want to ask you more like you have an amazing journey around the world and trying to do it here. And I love Romania, but only it can get quite small as well. And I'm looking for overseas, but how do you keep your challenge? You feel like you are still challenging yourself, even you are here, and you still find the motivation anywhere here, or how are you?
Yeah, actually, I think this is sort of what I learned with working with small business, and you get to start at the very beginning with them and grow their business. And I work best with two types of people, those who have a really strong vision or those who are really trusting. If you're in the middle and you're indecisive, it goes nowhere. So a lot of these businesses are really trusting, and when you take them on a brand journey, it's really rewarding, and that I try and make something that I know will, last them years to come. And I have to say, like, since I returned, like we sort of thought we'll take a backseat to our careers, it's all for the boys, but actually I've had some of the best briefs I ever could have had since I returned, like Department of State Growth, where they're like, oh, well, because of COVID, we can't go to trade shows, can you come up with an idea of what we could do on an Instagram activation? And I was like, well, how about tablecloths and ceramics? Things that I love. And so that was really interesting, to be able to do jobs like that. So it's sort of challenging myself, but it's also I get to do what I want now, and I just sort of pull on my work, pull on my, my own inspiration. And I'm always looking at, Pinterest and other designers and fashion and different things like that. And working with New York's great, because you sort of keep a toe in the water of sort of advertising world as well. So yeah, that answers the question.
I'm sorry for that question, but when you were at UCAS,
what were you, I'm sure it's obviously changed now, what were you specialising in? Because you seem to have, I guess, more in design and writing with the architectural side of things and also design and object to be, I see those things really influenced and stuff, and perhaps what you said picked up later. Is that something that you did at uni earlier, or
no?
Or graphic design, or?
Yeah, it was sort of purist graphic design back then. I did printmaking and photography, and I was rubbish at them. I hated it. I was really here for design. Like, I work well when I've got a brief and I'm left to my own devices, so I sort of flounder. But I really like packaging actually in that moment. But it wasn't really a big thing then, and packaging design, like it's sort of, you know, back then everyone did a white wine label, and now there's sort of a really changed sort of view of what that should be, and people are much more creative and trusting to sort of go out with it. But it's kind of been a slow burn, and I'm just sort of purposely now bringing in tactile things. Like, I love tactility. I just recently did a job that was sort of websites and digital, and I'm like, I really don't like this. I choose not to do this anymore. Other people who like that can do it. I like real tactile things, and I just want to play in that area. So doing exhibition spaces or fabrics and all that kind of stuff. So I'm sort of, now I'm in a position where I feel like if something comes in and it's not the right fit for me, I would just say no thank you and pass on it and pass it to a friend. And yeah, so
it's funny because we don't have that element now anymore with this common graphic design, whereas people have a little bit more respect for it now, how they see it interact with more tangible things, or marketing and architecture. I will also say I bought the rum bottle that you designed for Mona, especially for the sandstone element as a gift. That was all very much about the material. Put together and
thank you. That was a really nice job to do with Mona, and that was also a thing. Like, we had, I think, 420 bottles, and they put, you know, effort into design, and Jessie Hunnifin did an amazing work photographing it. And that for me is a really good example of the strength of, you know, design and brand story, and it sold out in 5 hours, which we didn't really anticipate, but that was good.
Okay.
Can I just interrupt you, because we've got some online questions here as well. Have we got time for those, Jose?
Yeah, sure. I'm reading the questions. I was gonna to ask Lel to respond these questions. One is from Friora. That says, what did you find the most challenging during your career?
I think the most challenging time was probably losing my job in the States, because I had such a plan and a roadmap for myself, and that was the first thing that really mucked that up and was a really hard lesson to learn, especially because they were family. You sort of take it really personally, and over time you learn that it's a business and you don't have to make business decisions. But that was sort of the most shocking experience I had. In terms of work.
Another question was from Matthew Robinson, that he's asked, like, thank you so much for the wonderful presentation, of course. And then he asked, just wondering what keeps you inspired.
I think I really enjoy working with up and coming brands and sort of giving them the tools to become successful. And when I have a client like Amalga who keeps coming back, and I see them growing, and when they thought, oh, we'd only have sort of, 10 batches of gin by this point, and we're actually on batch like 18 and we're doing really well, and they're growing really rapidly, and knowing that that's, the product, but it's also really strong branding, and that you had a role in that, and that's really nice, and I get a kick out of that.
That's great. Well, I have a question for you.
Jose, there's one more question, from Martin.
For Martin, do most of people, designers you've worked with, come from traditional design education backgrounds, or are there a few people who come from other pathways, either education or work-wise?
Most people that I work with in Amsterdam, for example, were more traditional background, also because you've got to get a work visa, which a university degree really helps to get a visa. Of getting visas is a whole other lecture series. So most of them were quite purist designers. A few are self-taught. It changed a lot with sort of digital coming into its own, where you would get, these young millennials who are sort of self-taught and, they're quite intimidating. The ones in Europe, thinking of Camille, who's like speaks 5 languages and just innately knows everything about digital, and they kind of are their own beast, and that's not necessarily a formal training. Or they went to something like Hyper Island, which is in Sweden. It's a sort of a digital school, digital sort of training ground, and that's quite different. But a lot of advertising agencies have a Hyper Island kid at some point. It's sort of a given these days. But yeah, usually through some streams. There are some different cases for that, and I would say Wyden actually has like a incubator program where they will take people from all walks of life, and a very good friend of my husband and I went through that. He's now ECD, one of the ECDs in 72 and sunny in Amsterdam, but he was working in a post office before that. Very random, and he's a genius writer, and he applied for this program and got it. So that was a completely different entry point. So big agencies like Wyden will often have sort of an incubator program to bring people in left of field, or if you're sort of in the industry but want to sort of change, sort of facilitates that. But yeah.
And yes, one question just from my side is how, after all this journey, and you say how important is your journey in order to get the contacts and build up your network, how challenging was after all this experience to build up your network back here at home? Yeah,
it was quite tricky. So we kind of came back and I was like, oh God, I don't know anyone. And then you've got to work on your network. So I met people I didn't know, people I did know, reached out, made contact in the real world, not just on LinkedIn. And then within a couple of weeks, we're like, oh, we know everyone. It's great. This is the beauty of Hobart, or Tasmania. It's quite small, which is great. And I would say one thing that is very different from working in New York, people are very guarded, especially when you're freelance, about their resources, and they don't like to share them. It was very hard, like, oh, where do you get this printed? It's like, oh, you'll find your way, or you'll find this, and they just don't want to share. Here, it's been the opposite, and everyone I've met has been like, oh, you're new here. Who do you need? What do you need? Do you need a photographer? Do you need an illustrator? I know this person who writes, like, just let us know. And like, everyone's had that sort of story to tell me, which has been really lovely and really refreshing. And we all do work with each other. Like, we all work with the same photographers and everyone. So we all support each other. And one of the DOPs here I work with, Lunston, he said it really nicely. And he said, a rising tide raises all ships. And if we all help each other and push each other up, then we all get, a better pay bracket and better respect and all of that. So that's why I really support each other, because it's a great creative community here.
That's great. And just a silly question. Yeah. How do you feel on Mondays?
On Mondays, I love Mondays. This is the thing, I love going to work. I'm a bounce into the office on Monday mornings kind of person.
So you love your work.
I do love my work, yeah. I hope that shows.
Okay, so I hope this Monday forum chill and... do you have another question? Yes.
An obvious one. What program do you use, Demelza? Like, obviously it sounds to be traditional where you're laying something out on paper and getting a concept together. But what program do you use, like digitally? Yeah,
InDesign, Illustrator, if I'm crafting a logo, for example, Photoshop, like pretty much just the basics, yeah. But I do like to bring that tactility we've got so many other opportunities that you can do digital printing on textiles now, and all these different things you get to play with that would have been, not possible a while back. So yeah, the new technology is fun.
Okay, well, we arrive at Swan. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, thank you very much everyone online to attend, and I hope this is the beginning of a great series of talks for the next weeks, and see you soon. I will post future talks soon. So a lot of thank you here.
Yep. Lovely. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.